This episode is sponsored by Squarespace. Whether you need a domain, website, or online store, make your next move with Squarespace. You've seen me share my portrait lighting kit on this channel, but that kit is actually my travel kit, the one that goes around with me, that's nice and portable and doesn't take up too much space. But what you didn't see is back in my old London flat, when I used to sit and talk on the sofa like this, behind that sofa were actually two huge roller bags filled with my old studio lights that I used to use for product photography. And by and large, when I wasn't doing product photography, that's where those lights lived. Before I bought the Godox lights, I would sometimes take out those lights and shoot headshots from home, but having people come over in that very small space trying to set up these studio lights on stands, I would often have to push sofas up against walls and do crazy things to get the lights in the right position, and I could never quite manage it because there was always this light hanging from the ceiling, and that's kind of the only place that I needed the light to be to get it at the right angle. So it was really frustrating. But I've recently moved and my new place has a garage, and I suddenly thought to myself, well, I've got these old studio lights, and they are old. I've had them for almost a decade now, but they still work absolutely fine. I'm never going to travel with them because they're too chunky, and my Godox lights do the heavy lifting for most of my portrait work now, and I wouldn't get very much selling them. But because I have this space, I thought I could set these lights up permanently, plug them in, so anytime I feel like it, I can just plug my camera in and shoot with anyone who comes over. So because some of you have seen some of the early test shots I'm doing in that space and asking me what the setup is, and I know others of you will be interested anyway, I'll take you in, show you how I've got things laid out to best use that space for the style of portrait that I do. But I'm very aware that a lot of you won't necessarily have the space to set up a permanent studio in your home, and you won't have the budget for things like studio lights, but you can actually still do a lot with a little bit of space and a small budget with things like Speedlight. So while I'm going around and showing you what I've done, I'll also give you ideas about how you can do things on a smaller scale for much cheaper. So let's head across. So this is my permanent studio space. It's in my garage. It's not a massive garage as garages go. I actually struggled to get my car in the first time I tried, but it's plenty to set up a permanent portrait studio in my house that doesn't have to move. So I'll talk you through everything, where it is and how I use it, and it's fairly simple. The backdrop you see behind me is by a company called Gravity. They do hand-painted backdrops out of Serbia. It was a little pricey. It's the one I decided to spend a bit of money on. And it's a medium gray, medium texture. So it's not too strong a texture, it's not too distracting. And when it's in the blur in the background, it looks pretty nice. I will show you kind of what the texture looks like so you can see there. Just kind of a medium painted texture, nothing too rough, nothing too heavy. That sits there most of the time. I like the look of it for portraits, but I also want other options. I don't want that to be the only thing that I can use. So what I've got are a number of other backdrops that I can pull in that are cheap and expensive fairly quickly. And they are these collapsible 1.5 by 2 meter backdrops. There's a black, I can literally just pop it up against here and let it lean. On the other side of this is the same sort of thing, just in white, so I could have white as well. I've also got behind here, let's see, I've got a gray, like a medium gray as well, which is also just gives me those tones but with no texture. And I've also got a collapsible one, which I've had for years and haven't used that much, honestly, which is kind of a textured darker gray with a bit of blue-green in it, which is why I don't really like it, and then a light gray with a bit of texture as well. But this kind of texture is not nearly as good as these professional hand-painted backdrops, so that doesn't get used too much. A lot of you want to know where those fold-out backdrops come from. The company is called PhotoCell. That's where I buy them from, on Amazon. And they're pretty inexpensive. 1.5 by 2 meters, fold out like that, and they're about £50, I think. And they work really, really well just to sort of be able to pull out, throw up a backdrop, something plain and clean. And I use them in another way as well. If you look, I've actually got them on either side here as well, on left and right, so you can see in frame. And at the moment, they're both on black, because how I use them is, you can actually use them to fill in and make those shadows darker, to kind of suck the light out on the sides. But if I wanted to throw more light back in on a subject and actually reflect, I can just flip these round and use them as a reflector. So if I turn this around here, you can see there's white on the other side with this reversible, and again I can just clip this up. And if I pull that in closer to my subject, you can see that's going to throw a bit of light in from the side as well. So I can have white, I can have black, I can suck shadows in more with the black, I can fill more with the white side to throw more light back in and balance it out a little bit. And that gives me very versatile options in terms of background. I can have texture, or I can have plain black, or plain white, or plain gray, or another options for texture gray as well. And then on the sides, the blacks and the whites in terms of whether I wanted to fill or deepen those shadows. And all those were just pop-ups. And again, like I said, they're about £50 each, so they're really not that much. One other little reflector I like to have around is this one here in the back corner. And it's just a little triangular shaped. It's a 5-sided, so I've got a white on there, and I've got a gold on the back, as you can see there. But if I turn it inside out, I've also got a black and a silver option as well. But what I usually do with this, very simply, and I only really use the white, I don't really use anything else. Gold I would only ever use for sort of outdoors in a desert or something anyway. But can you see what that's doing? Just sort of throwing some light back in underneath my chin here. And I'll often just put this out of frame and sit behind it and have the subject rested on their knees like this. And then what that's doing is just lifting, and it's going to give a beautiful little catch light in the bottom of the eye as well. Just sort of throw some light into that bottom part of the iris and pop the color as well. So this is a great little reflector to have on hand. And you can see I'm now surrounding I haven't even talked about lights yet, and I'm surrounding my subject by ways that I can darken down the light or brighten it back up to sort of fill in around. So let's talk about lighting. My lighting setup, as I've said in previous videos, is pretty simple, and I like to keep it that way. I don't like lots of complicated lights. 90% of the portraits that I shoot are just one light. Sometimes I'll throw in a little light on the back just for a bit of a hairline or a rim light if I want it. So most of my light comes out of this light that you see here. And this light is the Bowen's GM400, so the Gemini series 400. And these are the lights that I used to use for my product photography for years and years and years. And just to help you, because I know when I talk about lighting and strobes like this, a lot of people get confused. Why is it on? It looks like a constant light. So what you're seeing at the moment is actually the modeling light. And when I pop the flash, the modeling light turns off and the flash itself fires. So I'll just show you a test. So if I hold this here so you can see, that's the modeling light. And when I hit this, I hope it's going to work with the shutter speed. See it turn off, and then the flash pops. So at the moment that you actually fire your strobe, the modeling light itself isn't on, it's only the flash. And the reason is because these lights on their own are quite yellowy and they're not very powerful, but the flash itself is very powerful and it's got a very, very good color accuracy, so all your colors look good. So your modeling light is just to help you set that light up and place it in the right place. So that's a Gemini 400 here, which is my old product light. I've got it on a boom stand so I can sort of put it overhead a little bit. And you can see very, very simple controls. I use a sync cable, which is here. I mean, you can use triggers as well, of course, but I like to use a sync cable. It's just simple. It means it's just running straight through a cable. And the way that it works is this sync cable will pop this flash, and then I have a second flash in the back here if I want that extra little lift on the back. And what this does is this is set to optical, and it's got a little sensor on the top here. When that sensor sees this flash fire, because it's going through that sync cable, this will flash and pop at exactly the same time. So that's how they sync up with each other. Sync cable into this light, which fires. This one sees it optically through that little sensor and fires at exactly the same time. And the way that I work with these lights is usually I have this light, key light, on probably about 75%, say, and that backlight, if I use it, is just for that little back rim light. It's only set to about 10 to 20%, so very, very low, just to give that little bit of lift. And generally speaking, that's how I like to work. It's a very classical look. One light, probably quite Rembrandt, maybe a little lift on the back if I want. Let me tell you about the modifiers. The modifier I use is by a company named Lencarta. You can see there on the top. And it is a beauty dish, but it's also a softbox. So basically, I've got a grid on the front here. I've got a diffusion panel, another diffusion panel inside, and a beauty dish bowl, which is throwing that light out to all sides, and this grid, which is helping to shape that light so it doesn't spill too much on the background. So I can use this light as a beauty dish, or as a softbox, or as a gridded softbox. It is only about 80 centimeters, so it's giving a nice sort of shapely light. It's not too big. the general rule when it comes to lighting modifiers is your modifier should be about the same distance away from your subject as the modifier is big. So this is 80 centimeters in diameter, so it should be 80 centimeters away from me as the subject. Which is why in spaces like this, it doesn't make a lot of sense to use huge 1.5 meter octaboxes. They'll give you beautiful soft light, but you'll have to have them so close to your subject that you're going to start to lose all shape. And I like shape and a bit of drama in my portraits. So I do have other options. I do have another, if you can see up the top there, I've actually got another big octabox up there if I want to bring it out and do want that very soft light. But generally speaking, most of the work I do comes out of a modifier of around this size. And this is really nice and versatile. So if you want to look this up, Len Carter, I believe it's a 16-pole collapsible beauty dish. Search something like that and just make sure it's got the diffusion panels and the grid as well. On the back here, I have a strip box, which just means it's going to spread up and down that vertical on my subject and just put a bit of light here. Also got 2 diffusion panels inside and a grid on the front to prevent it spilling too much and falling onto my background, so I can control that light. And between this is a backlight set very low, and this is my key, which I'm using to shape light. And I'm either moving it left or right around my subject or up and down in terms of how I want to shape that light on the face. I keep things that simple and don't mess with it too much beyond that. What else can I tell you? I have a tripod in here. I very, very rarely use it. I like to handhold and sit on a stool opposite my subjects and be able to shoot with them like that. All portraits I shoot in here are on 50mm because I like that kind of proximity. If I'm 85mm, I'm up against the door at the back. I prefer to be a little bit closer, a little bit more intimate with my subject. So 50mm, but that still means I can shallow the depth of field and separate it out. And I'm usually on, I would say 2.8. I've got a 1.2 lens, which is gorgeous, but I'm never shooting at 1.2. I still want the front plane of the face, the whole plane, from the tip of the nose to just before the ears. I want the whole thing in focus, and I want it to start to fall off towards the back. So at the distance away I shoot, I'm on 50mm, around 2.8. Little things I've got. One is a strange little purchase I made, which has come in sort of useful. It's called Atmosphere Aerosol. And short of buying a smoke machine or a haze machine, which I might do, just to be able to soften the light, this is quite useful. You can just sort of spray it in the air a little bit. And if you let it settle and just sort of waft it around a little bit, what you'll find is that will just create a little bit of haze in the air, so that when you're shooting, it kind of softens everything down, gives a little bit of volumetric lighting, so the light's catching in those particles, which can look quite nice as well. That's a nice little toy. And I suppose the last thing I need to do is introduce you to Fred the Head, because he helps out when no one's around and I want to just sort of practice lighting setups or work out a look for something. I can pop Fred here on a light stand, and I can set lights up and play and try different backgrounds and different lighting options, so I can work out before my subject comes what sort of look I want. And Fred was £8 off Amazon. Just search for rubber or plastic mannequin head, and you can get something like this, which just helps you to kind of practice when there's nobody around to practice with. And I've found him quite helpful. Yeah, and I mean, you might not have this sort of permanent space to set things up, but you can see from the way that I've got things done that there are ways that you can shrink this down and make it much simpler. So these collapsible backdrops, for example, you probably won't have space in your lounge if that's where you're shooting for something like this with a big stand that sits there permanently. But these little collapsible backdrops actually fold up pretty small. So you can see that's the size it is, which you can just pop against a wall. But when you fold it down, it's just going to fold down into a bag this big, which is not very much, and you could easily slide it behind a sofa if you want, and it could just sit there. You could have one like this, which you can pop up, reversible black and white, which you could use for different options. And if you wanted 2 or 3 like I've got, you could have other ones on the side to use as reflectors or to darken down those shadows. You could use a corner of a room where you pop one up as a backdrop and you pop one against the next door wall so that that could play as your reflector or your gobo to sort of deepen those shadows out. There's lots of little options like that, and these are very inexpensive, £50, very, very cheap. So you can grab those, and then I mean, like I say, most of my portraits are one light. So just a very simple, basic light stand, little clamp on the top, and a speed light, and you could shoot beautiful portraits just with a light stand, one of these folded behind the couch, a speedlight, and a modifier like the one I've got here, you can produce beautiful stuff. In fact, I've got a video on this channel that shows you exactly how to do that, to get beautiful looking portraits just with one speedlight, or for under £200 in terms of the outlay for your lighting in your background. So I'll link that down below if you want to check it out. Now that I have this space permanently set aside, I'll probably be doing a lot more videos about portraits and different lighting setups and how I create different sorts of moods when it comes to the portrait work that I do. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, comment below and let me know. It's early days and I'm still getting used to how to use that space really well and getting all the lighting dialed in and the choice of modifiers and the right distances from subjects and all those kind of things. But just the fact that I've got this space now is a real privilege. I mean, I came from this London flat where I was living for almost 10 years, which was really small and really pokey and very, very limiting. So I feel very, very lucky that now I have a garage I can actually use for something like this. And it's great to be able to have people who come and stay with me to be able to go, let's just shoot some portraits quick. And I can literally just walk in, plug the camera and switch the lights on and go. Before I show you some of the test shots that I've been doing in this little studio space, I want to take a second and thank Squarespace for sponsoring this video. If you need a new website or a domain, they're a fantastic option. I've used them as my website platform for a good decade now. One of the features on Squarespace that I find really helpful are their e-commerce functions, because as a photographer, a large part of the way that I support myself is by selling a book of my own photography every year. And it couldn't be easier to load up the new book every year onto the store. It takes probably about 10 minutes in total. And once it's live, I can let people know, I can see the orders coming in, they've got all the information that they need, they're sent a confirmation email automatically, and then once the shipping has gone out, I can forward them their tracking details, and it's all just a very simple automated process. Start your free trial today at squarespace.com and go to squarespace.com/Sean Tucker to get 10% off your first purchase.